The question of Logic in his music has always been one of consistency. Is he capable of making great albums? Absolutely. Is he also capable of making these sort of inconsistent, inconclusive ones as well? Yeah. Whether we're getting supermarket Logic or we're getting no pressure Logic, you just never know. And I always approach a Logic album with an open mind. So I've had a good sit down with his new album, Vinyl Days. Now, obviously when you look at the track list, you go, wow, 30 tracks. It can definitely be intimidating, but when you look at the actual runtime of the album, it's only an hour, 11 minutes. And I think Logic did a good job of keeping that in mind throughout this album. He didn't give people too much to consume. He's got some really nice tracks that just hit very quickly. 1 minute 30, 2 minutes, 2 minute 30. There's really few tracks far in between that run over 3 minutes 30. So they all kind of hit sort of this sweet spot of getting their concept, of getting their message across, hitting you with a vibe, and then moving on to the next one. Also, throughout this album, you have different skits, different interludes presented by different celebrity figures. Morgan Freeman, the man of the rich, deep voice, starts us off right away by calling Logic the GOAT and setting the tone for the album. And then a nice surprise was hearing Funkmaster Flex just laced throughout this. It really had the feel of like an old school mixtape when like DJs would hop all over it. They would hype it up. They would add to the energy, to the buildup of it all. You have Flex's commentary interlaced throughout this, just giving you kind of that gritty, nostalgic hip-hop feel. And Flex even sets the tone on one of the starting tracks, Danger. He says, still retired for what? He just got tired of the garbage. And yeah, Logic has a lot to answer for retiring. Why did he go away? I know he's spoken on it, but what better place to give a platform to it, to let the fans know what's been going through his head than through the music itself. The first flagship track for me is Tetris. That to me is an angry, darker, grittier Logic. It's the Logic that we all love, who's got that old school soul, but he knows how to carry himself over the flows of the beats. He gets very poetic. He's got some great lines and punchlines on it too. One of my favorite lines from the hook, Logic stay connected on the block, bitch I'm Tetris. More tracks than Amtrak by the end of the line. Very braggadocious style of Logic. It's the Logic, that I first heard when I heard Tic Tac Toe. That type of very in-your-face, gritty. You could tell what he's been inspired by through his tracks. And I also love the homage paid to Jay Dilla, who was a huge influence on Logic. Actually, throughout this album, you can hear Dilla's influence and, how it's affected Logic's choice of production and the feel that he wants to give for his album. And rest in peace to Dilla, by the way. Man, can you imagine if he was still here? In My Lifetime has a very nice feature from Action Bronson, man, an independent artist who has been on fire. Action Bronson just has a very cool, suave swagger, style of delivery, man. He's always like slower with the flows and the pockets, but he's got airtight rhyme schemes, and the man he likes his wordplay as well. But for me, one of the biggest surprises was you got a little bit of storytelling Logic on the cut. When he raps, it's like my life was written through a murder scene. Even in my early teens, I saw a guy on the corner getting high when a stray bullet from a drive-by blew his brains through his right eye. It's that type of gripping street Nas-esque storytelling that I think Logic, I'd love to see more of. And if I have one complaint on this album, really, it's that I would have loved to see him just explore more topics like this, talking about his come up, instead of just getting the braggadocious Logic, instead of just getting, him just dancing over beats. I love when he gets more real. I love when he gets really gritty and paints these different pictures for us, because he's shown in the past how good of a storyteller that he can be. Decades comes through with some very smooth singing harmonies. It actually reminds me of his Welcome to Forever mixtape, which is one of my personal favorites from Logic. And actually, it's very fitting because on Decades, he takes part of a verse from one of his tracks on Welcome to Forever and redrops it on a Decades. And of course, it's not a Logic album if he doesn't talk about his biracialness, being half black, being half white, and that's exactly what the doctor ordered when he comes through with Black White Boy. But for me, for the beginning segment, it's one of the strongest standing songs. It's definitely one of the highlights. Some dope lines that just stuck out to me, like in the cut like a mason. I'm trying to slice open my veins just to feel something. Yeah, there's a very raw, pissed off Logic, and I think when you get angry Logic and he just gets into this darker sort of mode, you get some of the best Logic out of him. He also pays homage to Cole, to Kendrick, to some of the greats. This whole album is like a celebration of hip-hop history, and you could just feel how much Logic has a love and an appreciation for the culture, for some of the greats, and it's sort of like reigniting this love of old school. And throughout the album, really, there's a lot of these old school break type of beats. You can see the Dilla influence, like the Nujabes influence, the Madlib influence, some of these great, classic gritty producers that he's taken. And yet somehow, for me, where he really succeeds is creating sort of a a new style with it. You know, something that can sit in today's more contemporary era, but still pays homage to the old school. You know, it doesn't feel like it just lives in the old school. It feels like the album could live and exist in today's world and in today's consumption of hip hop. Another favorite line for me is when he talks about sampling Tribe Called Quest's Kick It, and he did that on the Supermarket album. And, you know, he kind of laments, and very ironically here and sarcastically, that he ended up not paying Tribe Called Quest for cutting that sample. He paid Lou Reed for the rock and roll sample of it. I mean, sampling is something that has been integral to hip hop from the beginning. It's something that's always been used, that's always been featured by different artists. Logic, being a fan, again, like we talked about, that old school style, loves his sampling. And, you know, one of the consistent themes throughout this is his difficulties in clearing samples, dealing with sampling. There's definitely like this long running joke throughout the album of sample clearance and different ways in which it's used, and we get to it later when he talks about the Nardwuar sample as well. Another punchline that I really liked from this one was the realest I've ever been, far from SAG-AFTRA. You know, the Actors Guild, staying away from the actors, just keeping himself and who he is. And even one of the final lines of the song, for me, kind of summarizes his feel and his mood for this album when he goes, you know, I'd rather fail trying something new than doing the same shit every day. Fuck you. Quasi's just like a feel-good type of track because it pays homage again to one of the greats, one of the great producers, Madlib, who worked with MF Doom on one of my favorite albums of all time, Mad Villainy. And Madlib's also a dope rapper. And him and his alter ego, Lord Quasi. I mean, this is Logic encouraging the return of Quasimodo and encouraging Adlib to get back onto the mic and to give the fans something new. Talk about sampling, Bleed It. A huge homage being paid to the Beastie Boys. It's got that rocky hip-hop blend, that raw feel to it. Even Logic gets a little bit sort of chanty with his choruses, comes through with that, you know, punch you in the face, smack you in the mouth, Beastie Boys vibe. I mean, even on his mix of his vocal, he's got like this distortion that the Beastie Boys often use. It's kind of like megaphony, it's kind of rocky, and it just cuts and sits over the top of the mix a little differently. La Donda is definitely a weird one for me. You know, in one sense, he talks about his relationship with Def Jam, you know, asking where the fuck's at since this is his last album with them and he's done with his Def Jam contract. He also takes the opportunity while being in the middle of this album to start hinting at the next album, which will be College Park, which will be an independent release. And shout out to MD, shout out to College Park. You know, we're excited for that, but it is an interesting choice, like in the early stages of your album still, because remember, this is a 30-track album to talk about turning the page on what's next, you know, looking forward to the next chapter without like completing this chapter and finishing the story that you're in. Logic then kind of goes off on a tangent that was surprising to me about Anthony Fantano, of all people, a fellow music reviewer here on YouTube. You know, he's criticized some of Logic's albums before. And listen, as an artist, you know, we all get critique. We all deal with reviewers. And I guess for whatever reason, Fantano has really gotten under Logic's skin. I mean, he even goes so far as to fantasize about murdering him. And speaking on that on the track, yeah, it was definitely a weird sort of place that Logic was in, and just, yeah, a headshot. I'm honestly still processing that one, and hopefully Fantano's going to be okay. I think he might need a bodyguard after that one. Clouds is just a cool track. I mean, honestly, Clouds just feels like La Donda Part 2. And then yet again, you have the teasing of the next album of College Park. And personally, I'm not a huge Currency fan, but I felt like Currency actually held his own and contributed to a nice little switch up, nice little production change, nice flow change, just a different vibe and feeling to that track. Favorite skit by far is when Michael Rappaport just trolls the shit out of Logic and Michael Rapp. You know, jokes obviously about Logic always using the biracial lines, tells Logic to go explore using auto-tune, and oh man, it is comedy gold. Therapy Music with Russ might be one of my favorite tracks on this album. I mean, Russ just continues to get more and more confident, more and more composed. I mean, the man is just killing it. He's having a hell of a year yet again with his music and what he's doing, and it was a great choice by Logic to feature Russ on this one. And I like how Logic takes the opportunity to talk about him dealing with mental health and some of the issues and things that he dealt with, because obviously he's someone who struggled with, you know, social media commentary, this internet life, and being just so exposed to so many opinions, you know, in the click of a button right in an instant. And you could tell that it's something that has weighed on his mental. You know, he's tried to explore this in previous albums, and it's something that still comes to the surface even now with some of these cuts and some of these tracks. We also get an Eminem shout out with 8 Miles from the Surface of the Earth. I Feel Infinite, shouting out Eminem's 8 Miles, shouting out Eminem's first album, Infinite, as well. Another dope line, Logic rose from Jack, even the Titanic sank. Like You Campin', that's intense. the intensity of it versus being intense, T-E-N-T-S. Listen, when Logic wants to dive into his wordplay bag, he's capable of it. It's not like to the crazy level of an Eminem, but it's nice for Logic just to show the variation in his skill set as an MC. Rogue One is a great example of the dark, funky rhythms throughout this album, and just some of these grungier drum kits that really do take you back in the past, yet don't lose their place today. Speaking of going back in the past, he's got an interesting feature of Wiz Khalifa, who I'm still trying to decide if he actually contributes to the feel of this album or if it's just Wiz Khalifa. I mean, his standard classic flow, he kind of sits in his own place, in his own creative space. And Logic takes advantage of the track, which I thought would be the concept of Breath Control, to show just how fast that he can flow, some of his more intricate schemes, the way that he can switch things and just change gears and move at different paces with his rhythmic patterns. But if I did have one critique on that one, we just didn't have like a Eminem Godzilla moment, because we know Logic can rap fast, and it just would have been nice, especially on a song called Breath Control, if he just went off on an 8-bar sequence of just super Guinness Book of World Records delivery without breathing and just really wow the listener. He had a great opportunity. I mean, he had some really nice airtight fast schemes, but then he kind of slowed down gears. He kind of switched it up. He was getting more vibey and saucy in that pocket, and I just would have liked to see on Breath Control just him really take off and go far away with it. Nardwuar is just a really cool one, because you just take internet personality and musician Nardwuar and literally take his vocals and cut it up and turn it into just a dope sample, blend it into the production, which just is one of the skill sets really of Logic whenever he works with sounds and production. He's got a great ear. He knows his history. He can dive into a catalog, have an idea, chop up a sound, and really create just some really dope beats from it. Kickstyle puts on an artist I've never heard before, I Am J Mars. I mean, listen, he had a really good verse on it, the Houston rapper. I was very impressed with that. Love the passing of the mic back and forth between him and Logic. You also had the Rattpack come through with C. Castro, Big Lenbo. Shout out to the fellow MD artists taking over. And Early Bird's definitely a very interesting transition sort of interlude moment, because again, this theme of Logic talking about sampling, and in this case it's a conversation on how sampling is a part of an artist's identity, how sampling can show the history and what that artist was inspired by, what they grew up on, and it's a way to carry the culture forward and to pay homage to past greats and past tracks. 10 Year had two highlights for me. One, I never knew that Logic won a chess game against GZA, founder of Wu-Tang Clan, NYC, just amazing rapper. Like before a show, he flew out. And then you even had a shout out to a show that I've enjoyed on Netflix. Yeah, I'm not afraid to say it. The Queen's Gambit, playing off of him being from Queens, playing off of Queens and chess, and also the name of the title of the Netflix series itself. And then Royce the 5'9". Royce the 5'9". Royce is just taking rhyme schemes now, and it's like just Christmas in that bitch right now. Like every single word just lights up and connects with its corresponding word. I mean, he had literally lines upon entire lines that rhyme together. He also had a very dope scheme playing off of the 3/5 compromise, when counting slaves, 3/5 of the southern population of slaves, and then playing off of drinking of a fifth. And then it goes even further, talking about different historical figures. Dangerfield Newby, who was with John Brown in the uprising, the slave revolt at Harper's Ferry. Josiah Henson, an escaped slave. Yeah, man, it's like walking through a history book with Royce, a philosophy book, and on top of that, he's just got the airtight schemes and wordplay that he is known for. Probably the best feature on the whole album. But if there's another feature that's definitely very close to that one, it comes right after in Porta 1. I mean, RZA from the Wu, come on now. And Logic starts it off by paying homage to a classic Wu-Tang track. I come rough tough like an elephant tusk, and bring the ruckus. And RZA just gives you that classic, gritty, in your face, raw, rugged, New York MC type of style that he's known for. And I love some of the homage paid to Cool G Rap, Eric B, Biz Markie, rest in peace. This track really just feels like a celebration of hip hop. And this is what's really cool about what Logic is doing throughout this album. You get a Fantano skit with the needle drop, and yeah, we'll leave it at that. It's just Fantano rambling about trying to fit in creatively into Logic's creative rubric. I thought it was funny, a little bit of trolling from Logic, deciding to leave that in and not having something, I guess, that's more scripted, but at the same time it feels very raw, it feels very improvisational, and honestly quite a few tracks on this album have that sort of raw, improvised, more of a mixtape feel than an album feel to them. And listen, if I'm an artist on the come up who's looking for an opportunity to get my name out there, man, I couldn't think of a better chance than what Logic did in the way that he presented Nezzy and introducing Nezzy. Female MC, very gritty flows. Again, yeah, some of that old school style brought into the new school. Definitely an MC I would look out for, one I want to hear more tracks from, and you need more female MCs like that, of that caliber and style in the game. Orville really hit me when Logic dropped that very smooth Family Matters bar, playing off of Stefan and playing off of Steve Urkel. And then he switches out of that into this sort of change, transformational bar where he shapeshifts into your mother and then slits your own throat with it. And it's just, for me, that's kind of the perfect representation of the Logic that we love on this album. You know, there's a little bit of that nerd, a little bit of that sci-fi Logic mixed with that, you know, that kid who has been through it, you know, who's been from poverty, you know, who's seen crime, who's seen drugs, who comes from a broken family, who has one hell of a story to tell. And, you know, he knows his hip hop history and he's influenced by some of the greats. It's like that dark meets that light Logic and that balance and how he walks it throughout on this track. Also, I got a shout out to Blue, another dope MC that I'm starting to discover more of and appreciate more. I thought he was a perfect choice for this and a perfect fit for this cut. Carnival was dope, seeing AZ, one of Nas's boys, on there. AZ, just a very airtight lyricist as well. Again, Logic, it just feels like Logic is choosing people that he's admired throughout his career, you know, and that he's always wanted to work with. And he's finally getting a moment and a chance to put them on and to feature them on tracks while sprinkling some, you know, unnamed, lesser known artists that he wants to give some limelight to as well. Vinyl Days is another one of my favorite tracks with the one and only, the legendary DJ Premier, DJ Primo. I'm so glad that Logic was able to do a track with Primo. Just some amazing strings on it, some amazing piano blends. It's like orchestral hip hop at its finest. It was a perfect sound for Logic. I love the way he handled himself on that beat. You know, he starts off his verse right away. All I need is one mic, shouting out Nas. Far from an anti-vaxxer, but I move the needle, coming through with the bars too. And then just to kind of add the icing on the cake, I mean, Primo just pays homage to Gangstar, to his Joey Badass cut as well. He just has some nice scratches towards the end to mix that in there with it. I mean, that's a classic song for me. That's one that I'm going to replay and I'm going to listen to again and again. I Guess I Love It, featuring one of the biggest Eminem trolls right now, none other than the Game. And you know what, to be fair to Game definitely impressed me with this verse. He kind of took the Royce to 5'9" route, had some very good, nice, tight rhyme schemes. Probably not rhyming as much as Royce, not as intricate as Royce, but he had some nice connections, some nice homage being paid. Game knows his history. Game's a big hip-hop head as well, and it definitely exudes and comes out through his raps and through his music. And then Sayonara is a very interesting, different kind of way to sign it all off. I mean, it's a 10-minute track. I don't know how many people want to sit there and listen to Logic just talk and ramble on for 10 minutes, but I guess the same people who listen and watch me just ramble on for God knows how long this one's going to be. You know, but what I find interesting is that it's kind of like the last chapter in the Def Jam journey for Logic. And there's one side of him that's grateful for the opportunity with the platform that Def Jam gave him to reach a bigger audience, to have the success that he's had. But there's also that side of him that feels like they kind of held him back in places. You know, as he even said throughout Sayonara, you know, when he's thanking people, there were good people at Def Jam, good people who had his back, who he loved, but there were also fuckboys at the label who literally to this day could just sit and spin on it for him. But one connection which I definitely found interesting, you know, when Logic was back in the mixtape days, the Call of Duty days, when he was working with FaZe Clan and his buzz was so high, you know, there was this question on where was he going to go? What label was going to pick him up? Because it was only a natural progression for him. And one of the reasons why he picks Def Jam, like he says on this, is because of the opportunity to work with classic hip hop producer No ID, who's worked with Kanye, who's worked with Jay-Z, just so many greats. And just that chance for Logic, someone who loves hip hop as much as he does, someone who appreciates the great production behind some of these artists, that it was too much for him. It was the main reason why he wanted to dive in with Def Jam. And as he even notes, you know, his first album, he started off with No ID as the main producer. And then this album, it's him as the executive producer. And it's kind of like, you know, the evolution of Logic, his growth behind the scenes and sort of the culmination of all the work through the years that he's put into it and how he's grown as someone on the board, someone with the engineering, someone with the production itself. And again, it's interesting because, you know, no pressure where it feels like we're ending something. Like in this case, it's the end of an era. It's an end of all the Def Jam chapters. And yet, it's like before he can even turn that page, there's already writing on the next page. You're already looking forward to the next story. You're looking forward to College Park. And he even teases it yet again, moving on, being independent. It's almost like he's so excited to get to the next album, like he can't even fully finish and contemplate and think about the solution and resolution to this album. But at the end of the day, in terms of a comeback from Logic, I felt like this was a very strong foot forward, a very strong step in the right direction for what we're going to get from Logic from now on. But for me, what stands out most is definitely, you talk about timelines in hip hop. And I think what's really dope about this and kind of how he ends Sayonara is that, you know, he's reached back into the past. You know, he's put on some amazing features. He's paid homage to some of the greats. You know, the beats do have that old school type of vibe and feel, and yet they're so clean and they're so well cut. And there's just some great mixes to the beats and sounds and drum kits that make this just a really cool continuation of the rap timeline, but also it's a new story. It's a new chapter. It's a new book for us, the fans, to consume and to enjoy. And quite frankly, I think it's something that mainstream needs to hear, that you can still make music like this. You can still have this type of soul and this type of vibrance and this atmosphere to it while still doing something that can be successful. Is it Logic's greatest album? No. Is it a solid album? Definitely. But what did you guys think? How do you feel about Logic's new album? Comment below, share your thoughts on it. Do you think that he achieved what he wanted to achieve on this one? Do you think it felt like a whole cohesive album? Was it more of a mixtape? You know, how'd you guys feel about some of the features? What were your favorite songs? Let me know. Also, if you're here at the end, obviously enjoying the content, you know, as I go full time now, as I continue to make more videos like this, do me a favor, be sure to support the channel directly. It really does go a long way if you subscribe and notifications on. As always, just a reminder, stay safe, stay positive, guys. I love you. I'll catch you again.